So welcome everybody. My name is Andrew Berman. I'm the Executive Director at Village Preservation. Thank you so much for joining us this evening. Before we get started with our wonderful program, our plaque unveiling for 128 East 13th Street, the former studio of Frank Stella, let me say a quick word about Village Preservation. We've been documenting, celebrating, and fighting for the preservation of Greenwich Village, the East Village, and NoHo since 1980. We work to expand and extend landmark and zoning protections and stop inappropriate development while also encouraging appropriate development in our neighborhoods. We host roughly 75 programs a year, most of which are free and open to the public. Our events are meant to illuminate the cultural and architectural heritage, history, and depth of our communities and the value of preservation. We're a nonprofit membership-based organization, so your involvement and support mean the world to us. You can learn more at our website, which is villagepreservation.org, and please consider becoming a member or making a donation if you're able at villagepreservation.org/donate. And I'll ask Linnell to just drop those two links in the chat. One final note before we get going about Zoom protocol. I won't necessarily be visible during all of the talk, but I'll be here along with my colleagues. So please feel free to use the chat to say hi, tell us where you're from, or to raise any issues or thoughts. If you have questions for our speakers specifically, please use the Q&A function. It just helps us to keep track of them. And you can do that at any point, and we'll get to as many of those as we can. During the first part of the event, we'll hear from our distinguished speakers and watch a quick video. After that, we'll open it up for questions, and the program will end at about 7 p.m. I should note that this event is part of our historic plaque program, which commemorates the history of our neighborhoods by memorializing important events, individuals, and moments connected to buildings all around us. This will be our 18th plaque we've installed across our neighborhoods, and it's located on a remarkable building, 128 East 13th Street. This building was designed in 1903 by one of the era's most distinguished architectural firms, Jardine, Kent and Jardine, as a horse and carriage auction mart, and it's believed to be the last such building standing in New York City. This intended use explains some of its standout features, like the high central hall, where horses were paraded on rings for potential buyers. Later, during the Second World War, the building was converted into a machine shop and used to train women to do assembly line and inspection work for the defense industry, proverbially the home of Rosie the Riveter, as we called it. Most recently, from the late 1970s to the mid-early 2000s, the building served as a studio for the artist Frank Stella, who we're so honored to have joining us this evening. After that, the building was sold to an owner who planned to tear it down to build a 7-story apartment building. The construction plans had been approved, but the demolition permit had not yet been issued. So we at Village Preservation acted quickly, requesting an expedited review from the Landmarks Preservation Commission, which saved the building from demolition and was the first step in a 6-year-long process of getting the building landmarked. Now it is the home of the Peridance Capizio Center, and today we're here to put a plaque on it to commemorate its remarkable history. So without further ado, I'm going to just give a little introduction about our two speakers who are joining us tonight. Our first speaker is Adam D. Weinberg, who has served as the Alice Pratt Brown Director of the Whitney Museum of American Art since 2003. During his tenure, the Whitney has presented dozens of critically acclaimed exhibitions on emerging, mid-career, and senior artists. He's created award-winning educational programs, and the museum has experienced exponential growth of its permanent collection and dramatically expanded its performance program. Under his leadership, the museum opened its 222,000 square foot building designed by Renzo Piano in the Meatpacking District in 2015. And in 2021, the museum realized Day's End, a permanent public sculpture by artist David Hammonds on the Hudson River waterfront. Adam has curated exhibitions on a range of themes and 20th century artists, including Frank Stella, a retrospective presented at the Whitney in 2015. And I also just have to say that Adam and everybody in the Whitney have been a remarkable partner to village preservation over the years. So after a short video unveiling the plaque, we will hear from a former occupant of the building, Frank Stella himself. Frank is widely regarded as one of the most influential artists of his generation. A painter, printmaker, and sculptor, he was known initially for his use of geometric patterns in the minimalist style, and later for his experiments with shaped canvases and three-dimensional constructions. His work can be found in the collections of the Metropolitan Museum of Art and Whitney Museum of Art in New York, the Art Institute of Chicago, the National Gallery of Art in Washington, D.C., and the Tate Gallery in London, among many others worldwide. I would just like to very quickly show you what we are talking about here. On the right, hopefully you are seeing the building, 128 East 13th Street. On the left is the emblem we had created for the campaign to save the building, again, connecting to that World War II Rosie the Riveter history. And I am now going to hand the reins over to Adam Weinberg.
A great metaphor for the horse ring, Andrew, handing over the reins. I love that. My kids would die. They'd say that's perfect dad humor. Anyway, I first want to say just a slight addendum to the intro about Frank, in that his was the first one-person show of a living artist at the new Whitney Museum downtown, and that was not by accident, but very important and very symbolic for us about the importance of Frank to the Whitney, to New York, and to the history of art. I also just would like to say to all of you who are involved with village preservation, and if you're not involved with village preservation, it's a fantastic organization. I'm a great admirer of Andrew's. Andrew and I, actually, I didn't realize our career is almost exactly parallel to each other. I've been at the Whitney now for 19 years. He's been at village preservation for 20 years. And the plaque program that they are doing is absolutely fantastic. I lived in Paris for a while, and I have to say, one of the great pleasures in Paris is getting lost in the city, and you look up and you see that, you know, here is the place that Alexander Calder lived, or here is the place that Voltaire had lunch, or whatever it is. But it's always so exciting to kind of realize that you're not the first person who walked there, and that there were people who really had great experiences. And I'm, you know, thrilled to know that, you know, that Frank will be in the company of James Baldwin, Jane Jacobs, Martha Graham, and Anais Nin in this program. So it's a quite impressive list of people. So anyway, Andrew, thank you and Village Preservation for the great work that you're doing. It really is an honor to work with you, and I'm honored to be here tonight. So tonight, I'm going to tell the story of Frank Stella in 10 minutes, leading all to the building. We have wonderful images. Laura on my staff will be sharing with you. Are you all there, Laura? Yep, you're up and running. Frank Stella grew up in Malden, Mass. He went to Phillips Academy in Andover, Massachusetts, beginning in 1950, where as a high school student, he was introduced to art making as a serious pursuit, and the paintings of American immigrant artists like Joseph Albers and Hans Hofmann, which you can see up there on the right, who have remained lifelong influences on his art. He continued his studies in art and art making in New Jersey at Princeton, graduating in 1958. But reading history backwards, it's as if all of this was preparation for his arrival in New York City, which quite quickly can be considered triumphal. While at Princeton, Stella visited New York galleries and museums with professors such as Stephen Green and friends and fellow art enthusiasts such as Walter Darby Bannard and Robert Rosenblum. At that time, the bold, painterly brushstrokes of his work resembled the art of the abstract expressionist artists that so many admired, like Franz Klein and Willem de Kooning. But seeing Jasper John's painting of an American flag, many of which are on view right now at the Whitney as part of the Jasper John show, but he saw it at the Leo Castelli Gallery in January of 1958. It was a work that called into question whether it was a painting of an object or an object itself. And that idea was like a thunderbolt for Frank. He soon realized that he too could make paintings that were objects, that is, paintings that were about pictorial problem solving and not about self-expression per se. Thus, it was no surprise that after graduation from Princeton in 1958, Stella was a man with a mission, an artist in the making, and he promptly moved to New York City, rented a storefront on the Lower East Side, 5 Eldridge Street to be exact. Many artists actually still live on that street, to see what it would be like to do nothing but paint for 3 or 4 months in the expectation that he might be drafted into the military. The draft didn't happen, but his art did. New York City in the 1950s offered highly affordable housing in the fringe areas of Manhattan and also promised an incredibly rich cultural environment. Artists could find humble, Spartan storefronts, small-scale industrial spaces, and crumbling cold water flats in which to camp out, especially in downtown neighborhoods. Stella said he moved to New York City because it was a place where I could see art that I was interested in. It's as simple as that. Supporting himself as a house painter, he worked like a maniac on his art. As he said, it was possible for almost anyone to have enough work on the side in order to keep creating art. Everybody was working and exhibiting. There were exhibition opportunities, which means showing your work, and that's what artists really care about. They like to get paid for their work, but what really bothers them is not to have it seen. It was there in this tiny Eldridge Street space that he began making his radical large-scale stripe paintings. While the subject was painting itself, and not specifically a reflection on the environment around him, the early stripe paintings, such as East Broadway, were loosely inspired by the semi-industrial downtown surroundings, the predominance of black asphalt, and the yellow taxi cabs running through the city streets. Indeed, a work such as this was a distant cousin to the Dutch artist Piet Mondrian's New York-inspired Broadway boogie woogie. Indeed, Stella later referred to the yellow and black paintings of such works as East Broadway, which you're looking at, as the psycho color of the city. Pretty soon, he made the entirely non-referential series of black paintings for which he was notoriously famous. Through their titles, so many of these works suggested the city in which they were created: Coney Island, Astoria, Great Jones Street. In short order, it was clear that New York was and would be Stella's artistic home. There, he watched and participated in the tumult and exhilarating milieu of artistic activity alongside friends and peers like Carl Andre, Bob Rauschenberg, Don Judd, and Jasper Johns. At age 23, a fully formed artist, Stella would have his breakout opportunity inclusion in MoMA's 16 Americans. I wish it had been the Whitney's 16 Americans, but no, it was MoMA's 16 Americans, which included works by Johns, Rauschenberg, Ellsworth Kelly, and Louise Nevelson, alongside one of his black paintings, which was also acquired by the museum at the time. And that painting, which you're seeing here, was called The Marriage of Squalor and Reason, which perhaps may have referred to his current living conditions. He was anointed by New York City's art world. In the span of 6 or 7 years, he was taken on by the prestigious Leo Castelli Gallery in 1960, where he had the first of many solo shows in 1960, and became the darling, or should I say, enfant terrible, of New York's art world. He was included in the Whitney's Geometric Abstraction of 1962, and in multiple biennials beginning in 1964, and in the Guggenheim Museum's exhibitions, The Shape Canvas and Systemic Painting, respectively in 1964 and 1966. By this time, Stella was occupying his third studio, having moved from Eldridge to West Broadway and then to Walker Street, a typical migratory tale of New York City artists, always in search of more and better space with good light. Indeed, Frank's Eldridge Street studio could barely house the making of a single large canvas at any given time. In 1970, Stella became the youngest living artist to have a retrospective at the Museum of Modern Art, and in 1987, he was one of only 2 living artists to have 2 retrospectives at the museum. All the while, Stella's paintings were restlessly and dramatically changing, growing and moving from large to monumental to colossal, and from geometric flat painted surfaces to complex 3-dimensional, irregular, multi-shaped works that aggressively and seductively projected from the wall. The 13th Street studio, which we are celebrating today, where he worked for 27 years from 1978 to 2005, was not a luxury, but a necessity for Stella's increasingly complicated post-canvas works, constructed of massive and numerous cuts of torqued and painted aluminum elements fastened to a heavy-duty steel armature, which you'll see in a moment. Here we go. Stella, who works in series, produced hundreds upon hundreds of works from no fewer than a dozen of his legendary series in the 13th Street studio, from the celebrated and now iconic Circuit series to the Cones and Pillars and the Moby Dick series, all done in 126 East 13th Street. Stella's studio, as with all artist studios, are as much tools like brushes, spray guns, and pigments, essential to the construction of their art. As I remember it, the 13th Street space, which I had numerous opportunities to visit, had a generous, open, airy vaulted ceiling with skylights. It was a raw, workaday arena that would not only accommodate, but moreover, encourage ambitious, immense, and spectacular endeavors. It demanded as much as it offered. The former horse showroom in scale was reminiscent of the ateliers of historic European masters. But unlike those refined workshops, Stella's was not replete with assistants, but was crowded with his riotous, cacophonous, and joyous art. In Frank's studio, it was, and is, the artist alone in dialogue with the material of his art. In this space, he constructed works that took on the greats of the past, from Caravaggio to Picasso, and simultaneously shaped the future of art, delighting viewers and all the while questioning what art is, and what art might become. The dedication of this building would not only be a perpetual reminder of Stella and his vast contributions to the art of the 20th and 21st century, but also a reflection on how Manhattan was once not only the center for the display of art and the art market, but arguably, like Florence in the Renaissance, the forum worldwide for the creation of art, an activity of which in Manhattan is now largely of the past. Like so many artists, Frank has decamped to continue his efforts miles from New York City in a much larger studio, but he is still the single and singular maker at the center of it all. Thank you so much for giving me the opportunity to speak on Frank Stella, a wonderful man and a great artist.
Thank you so much, Adam. Why don't we move to the discussion between you and Frank, and we'll take care of the little glitch with the video and get that rolling.
That would be perfect. I have a few questions for Frank that might, hopefully open it, and we can open it up to a few of the people online with us tonight. But Frank, I was wondering, did first of all, how did you find the studio, and did the history of the space, not to mention obviously the architecture of the space, have particular meaning for you?
Well, I mean, all the spaces in New York are available to artists by walking around on the streets, and you look at the for rent signs. And I saw the sign, and the building was, I thought it was not really available. It was such a big building and all of that. But anyway, I just walked into the building and talked to what turned out to be the owner of the building. And we made a deal in which I rented the building. And then I talked to my lawyer, Gerald Ordover, who said, "You can't do that." And he took over the negotiations. And needless to say, that really increased their cost to me and their value to the owner.
And was it, I mean, you were mostly just attracted by the kind of scale of the building, Frank, or what?
Yes, I mean, but the one thing I think that everyone is attracted to, or at least people like me, is the ground floor entrance. That's more than anything what you seem to really need. And that's what, and that's how it worked out. I could get in from the ground floor, and that was how it worked.
And when you got to the studio itself, sometimes artworks kind of respond to the spaces in which they're made, intentionally or not. Did you find that being in that studio had led to certain kind of works or certain way of working?
Yes, I mean, it just I don't know, I sort of ran wild, I guess, up and down. I punched a hole in the floor, and then I could communicate to myself on one level and then another. But it was fine. And I don't know why, it was probably big enough. I don't know why you keep looking for something else, but I had a fantasy about being on the water. That's what New York was all about. And I found a place in Newtown Creek where I could be on the water. And then, as it turned out, I could be on the water, but I couldn't afford it. And so that led to a series of difficulties anyway. And I ended up having to push myself out of town.
You know, there's the photograph of the color of your book, which has a picture of the work Salto nel mio sacco of 1984. In fact, Laura could put it up just for a second, where you actually cut a hole in the floor because it didn't fit within the studio. Is that correct? Go back. There you go. If you all look at the picture on the left, you can see that work is actually cut into the floor itself.
Yeah, that was a way of getting it out of there. Well, anyway, it ended up, it had a happy ending up on 599 Lexington. Anyway, Mort Zuckerman took that over, that piece.
So this is a piece that everybody in New York can see as they're going up Lexington. It's still
Yeah,
up.
yeah, but I think they'll have to go down Lexington, but that's okay.
Oh, right. Good point. Just testing to see if you know which way you're going. So do you have particular memories, Frank, of either particular works or bodies of work that you were working on there that, maybe an anecdote that would be of interest to people in terms of working in that space?
I do remember that we could created a kind of aura of speed, as it were, and we just kept working all the time, and one thing led to another. I just, I don't know if I could do that again, or if I'd even want to do that. I don't know, but anyway, it was one thing after another, and as that cover of the book showed, it was. I don't know how it happened, but it got very involved with the art of the past. And so that I just had to think about it and deal with it, and deal with making my own art, I guess, although that sounds horribly pretentious. But anyway, but that's the way it was.
Mm-hmm. And the historical qualities of the building itself, did that have any effect at all for you, or not really per se?
It's hard to say. I mean, I felt comfortable there, unbelievably comfortable. And I had the probably mistaken idea that part of it had to do with the idea that it was a place for juvenile delinquents to be converted into policemen and fire department graduates.
History by rumor.
Yeah.
I mean, in those days, you could walk to the studio. And did you find yourself going to the studio late at night and or returning multiple times? Because now you really have to drive to the studio if you want to go.
Right, and then I have to go to jail or something. But anyway, but no, it was. I never worked that way. I never worked late at night, and I worked on something and then I stopped. And I never had I don't know how to explain it, but I never got that involved in what I was doing, except to the point of it was over, stop, and come back tomorrow or whatever.
Right. So one last question, and then we'll open it up for a few questions from the audience. Or do you want to do, I don't know, maybe do the video after? Is that, or how do you want to do it, Andrew? Up to you.
Why don't we, once you're done with your conversation with Frank, let's do the video, and then we'll
go to the questions. That's great. So Frank, is there anything that you miss about that studio or working in that studio, or its accessibility?
Yeah, accessibility, I guess that's it. But every time I've moved, which is, I don't know, 4 or 5 times, I mean, I've always adapted in a kind of way in which I forget about the other studio, or it's just a kind of a sentimental memory of it or something. And I become involved in what the new studio or whatever it is, or the new problems, whatever they are.
Mm. Well, I think that actually says more about you and about your work, that you're always in the present and on to the next. And I think it's probably, speaking
good idea.
From the heart, it's really true that, the thing I admire most about Frank is he's always moving forward. And, it's great that there are organizations like Village Preservation to preserve the past, because Frank is always looking forward to not what he did last, but what he's going to do next. And so, and he continues to work and do great work today. So, Frank, thanks for doing this. We'll do the video and then we'll come back and open it up for people to ask you a few questions.
Okay, thank you. Thank you all.
Absolutely. So I think Sam is going to get the video rolling now, so we can all see.
There we go.
There we are. From the plaque, which will now be here hopefully forever. Painter, printmaker, and sculptor Frank Stella lived and worked here from 1978 to 2005 in what was originally a horse auction mart for the city's elite, and then served as a women's assembly line training center during World War II. Known initially for his use of geometric patterns in the minimalist style, and later for his experiments with shaped canvases and three-dimensional constructions, Stella is widely regarded as one of the most important and influential artists of his generation. And we're so thrilled that we can memorialize this and make sure the public is aware of this history that's all around them. And why don't we just finish off the video?
It's wonderful the way Village Preservation recognizes the importance of arts and architecture to our city, which often ends up in the bottom rung. And it's actually very moving even to see it virtually.
Well, thank you so much. And I appreciate everybody's patience with a couple of technical glitches there. But Frank, I have a question for you, which actually is inspired by one that we received from the public. I'm wondering what your sort of memories are of the neighborhood in which the studio was located, and especially, how it changed over time. Certainly that area, there was a lot of artistic activity going on there, but a lot of other kinds of activity. And I'm just wondering your sense of the place in which your studio was located.
Well, it wasn't, as they say, too bad. I mean, there was a lot of pressure on me to clean up my act, as it were. And and it was always a conflict. I mean, I didn't want to be too available or do too much, or there was a lot of wanted me to clean up my building, and I kind of liked it the way it was. but I did clean it up a little bit. I tried to clean it up and not too much. I'm trying to find the right balance.
Sure. Well, personally, we're big fans of buildings that show their age and the, sort of layers of history on them. So I certainly understand that. Linnell and Juan, do you want to start with some questions from the public? I know you've been receiving quite a few.
Sure. Here's a question. Actually, I'll start with this one, just to build off on yours, Andrew. Frank, would you be able to comment on the ways in which the different places in which you have lived have influenced your work? Have you felt that it has sent your work in different directions?
Well, I guess I'll just say it outright. I started at the bottom of the city and worked my way up, but that was sort of the way the city developed by itself. I mean, I didn't get all the way down to the bottom, but I mean, under the bridge seemed like a really good place to start, and it was one of the cheapest places available. But I didn't think much about it. I just walked around. I liked walking, as I guess everybody does. I just walked, and what I saw, were places of opportunity, basically to live. But actually, they had to be able to work, places that I could work in, and what's interesting to me now, looking back, is that I ended up on 13th Street, which it was a place that was plenty generous enough for anybody to work in. But it never, I didn't know why I was moving on, to tell you the truth. I always like to have a little bit more room, but the more room, I don't know what it had to do with working as what it had to do, unfortunately, with storage. So you had to be able to work and be able to take care of what you made. And that was just seemed to be the way things worked.
Thank you. We have another question. Actually, it was something that I was wondering about myself, from Mara Lane, about the influence of Caravaggio on your work. Adam, this is from your presentation. It's not something that I would have guessed.
Well, they claim that he was a very bad boy. I don't know. I don't think I was that bad, but it's just.
Did he kill someone and got run out of town or something like that? I mean, that's.
Well, maybe. I mean, the reports are pretty old, but I mean, but he was active, and he was active in just about every way, and it was a period in which most of his activity was directed by the church. In a way, they really wanted him to perform in a way that he was more than willing to do.
Thank you. Here's a big question, either for you or for Adam.
Yeah, let Adam do it.
From Grace Toy, amidst all the socio-political changes that America faces today, where do you see the country and art influencing each other? That's an easy one. You can. Adam,
Yeah,
would I tackle that, Frank?
Yeah,
I think I'll stay on mute. I think I'm going to stay on mute. It's a very good question, but I think I will leave that for another venue, because tonight is really to focus on
Sure.
on this. But thank you for the question, and sometime I will do a 3-day symposium on that.
Here's another one, Frank, specifically on your work. Several people have asked about your work after you left the studio on 13th Street.
Okay, after I left the studio on 13th Street. Okay, I get it. Yeah.
So your work since then, in other words.
Yes. One of the things about moving out, or one of the things that happened was is I started to work where I had been working before, at Dick Polich's studio. So I was really working next door to where I'd been working all the time before. So it was really working at the foundry. So I made it changed my thinking of my work a little bit, in the sense that I was then working with material that was there and for me every day. And it was really about casting and about working with the work that was there. That doesn't make too much sense, but really it really was about casting and the physicality of the work, and in a way that I couldn't do it before. I couldn't do it under a studio circumstance. It had to be under a circumstance where I could do casting all the time.
Frank's current studio is literally next door to Polish Foundry, so it's possible. It's something you could never do in Manhattan itself.
Here's a question I received. How important is being within an artist's community? Do you think to you or your work, is it more important as a younger artist or as a more established one? And did that play an influence in your life?
Well, I mean, when you're younger, I mean, all of my friends and all of the people whose art I admired and everything, I just was natural, or I didn't even really think about it. And it was, and you know, I can say this now, I guess, it was pretty exciting actually to be with people who were doing what you were doing, and you could or like what you were doing, and you didn't have to think much about it. You know, it was there, you were doing it, they were doing it, and it was, you know, and I believed that it was at a pretty high level, but I could never prove that.
Right. Juan, do you have more from the chat and the public?
I think that these were addressed as we were scrambling to take care of the technical difficulties. They have to do with the selection of the studio. If I, for the back of my head, was picking up what you were saying, you were talking about just looking for rent signs and looking for bigger space. But I guess riffing off of that, is there stuff that you miss about that space? Because I pass by it all the time, and I think, gosh, if I were a famous artist and could paint somewhere, this would be a really nice building to do so in.
Well, I took a lot of flack about the working space book, in which people said, yeah, that's nice. You know, if you're a rich, successful artist, you can throw away that kind of space on a book cover. But I don't know that, you know, people have bigger or smaller studios depending on their, you know, what's available and what the, you know, what the trajectory of their life turns out to be. I don't know. I mean, look at Mondrian. I mean, you know, I mean, how can it be any better than that? And that didn't take up a lot of space.
Frank, when you came to New York, Frank, did you think that that this would be the place you would remain for the next 60 years? Or you
I didn't know what 60 years was.
Yeah.
Along those lines, I'm curious your thoughts about sort of New York as a center for art making now, certainly as compared to when you were younger. What role do you think the city plays now?
Well, I feel on the spot. It's like, I don't know. I mean, because I'm not what I was when I came. So I don't know. And to tell you the truth, right now, you know, I can't tell if it's the end of the line or, you know, the beginning of the show. I don't really know.
You mean for the city as a place for artistic production?
No, I'm talking about myself. You know, I don't have much of a, I don't have much of a frame of reference. I mean, the city is my frame of reference outside of myself. And I mean, I think we're pretty well integrated, you know, and I just go step by step. I mean, I don't know if I'm going to end up in Chicago or not.
Frank does live in the village too.
Are there, I'm curious, you know, early in your career, were there places other than New York that you had ever contemplated, or was this where you had to be?
Yes, when I traveled, when I was fortunate enough to travel, you know, people helped me out and I was able to go places. I went to a lot of places I really wanted to see. I mean, you know, who wouldn't want to go to Istanbul or Cairo or, you know, I mean, places that I was interested in, but I didn't, people would always ask me, yeah, but could you live there? And I'd say, yes, but I don't know if I could have.
Well, I just want to mention, Frank, that we're getting well wishes to you from not only across the city, but across the world, from Italy. We've got some well wishes from the West Coast. One of the wonderful things about being able to do this virtually is that, you know, people can participate from far and wide. You know, I just want to mention to everybody that that plaque is now there. So we encourage you to go by and see it in person. And hopefully it will help keep the memory of what happened at that building alive, even as Frank continues to produce work and, you know, New York hopefully continues to contribute to the production of art in the world. Adam, do you have any sort of kind of final closing comments you want to make?
I mean, simply to say that, you know, what, first of all, it's so great that, you know, you all in Village Preservation are preserving things. And, you know, as we know, and this is what artists teach us, it's, you know, that things continue to change. And, you know, and we never want things to stop changing, but that doesn't mean you have to lose the past, and trying to find that great balance between history, which I think is in many ways, the great example of what we learned through Frank's lectures and his work, is that the continuity of great art over many centuries, even as there are tremendous ruptures. And I think that's true with the urban environment as well, that it's all well and good that there are big changes and ruptures, but if you don't have retain the past, you don't know what you're even separating yourself from. So, so thank you, Frank, for doing this tonight.
Yes, thank you,
all.
Frank. Thank you, Adam, to the Whitney, to the folks over at Perry Dance and 128 East 13th Street for allowing us to place the plaque there. You would think that would be an easy sell, but it's often not.
No.
We're especially grateful when we have supportive property owners. You know, thank you both so much for your contributions to the life of the city that we're lucky to be able to celebrate and memorialize with this plaque. Juan, it looks like was there something you wanted to say in closing?
Taish Mender, the owner of the building, was very supportive throughout, and I sent him an invitation if he joined us. I wanted to thank him for his support and helpfulness throughout the entire process.
Great. And I want to thank Juan and everybody on the Village Preservation staff, as well as all the folks from the Whitney who helped in terms of putting this together.
Many thanks to Laura Busby, who picked all these photographs with me so that we have a little family album of Frank here. It was great. So thank you, Laura. And thanks, Frank. And thank you, Harriet, for being the technician on that side.
Well, good.
Thank you.
Harriet, good to see you. Thank you so much.
Thank you all very much for joining us. See you soon, Frank.
Okay, thank you all.
Take care, all.
Bye. Thank you, Andrew. Thank you, Ruth.
Bye.